Good evening. Welcome back to Revelation Generation. I'm your host, Sean Teets, and I'm glad you have joined me this evening. If you've been watching over the past few episodes, you know we've been discussing about the sequence of end-time events. And I've kind of been taking you around a bit in describing how the very end events are going to play out. And so we talked about the final 7 years, and we've been concentrating on the final 7 years. But we also know that according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, that final 7 years starts with an event that we call the confirmation of the covenant, which is the peace agreement with Israel. We know we're not there yet. We understand that we're not there yet. But these prophecies are of a definite interest to many people. And when dealing with a prophecy and with teaching prophecy, you get some of the same questions as it pertains to the timing of end time events. When's the rapture going to happen? What about the Great Tribulation? And one question that you often get is, well, where are we now? Where do you see that we're at now? And that's a very good question, because in order to determine where you're going, you have to understand where you are at. And I think as we study Bible prophecy, we would be very surprised to learn and to understand that we're much more advanced in where we are in Bible prophecy than what many people have thought. We're a lot further along and a lot closer than what people have thought. And the reason being is because a lot of these things aren't to be known until the people of the time of the end. And that can be found in Revelation chapter 12, Daniel chapter 12, when Daniel was so frustrated that he couldn't understand all of these visions that he'd been given, and he asked God what the timing of these things shall be. And the Lord told him to seal up the visions because they are reserved for the people of the time of the end. So we understand that not many of these things are known until now, because we're starting to see these things come to pass now. And we're starting to understand that this is what the Lord was talking about. And so tonight I would like to answer the question of looking at what is happening next. Because we can look at the Bible, and in understanding some of the sequences of how these things are coming together, we can take a look and see roughly where we are and what's going to happen next. Now, I know I've been discussing a lot about that final 7 years, but there is an event that's supposed to happen on or about the timing of that final 7 years that must take place either in conjunction with it, conjunction with the start of it, or, which makes more sense to me, to start prior to that, and in fact being the catalyst for that final 7 years to start. Because we know that final 7 years starts with a peace agreement, and if you look at the situation between Israel and Palestine now, between the Jewish world and the Muslim world, there is very little chance of reaching a peace agreement anytime soon. So it seems that there will be an event that will cause or be a catalyst for people to say, okay, now we must have peace. And so I want to talk to you about that tonight, and we can certainly find an event that would cause that in the book of Revelation. And that'll start in Revelation chapter 9, starting in verse 13. And it says there, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay a third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in a vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth, and of brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire, and smoke, and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. So there's a lot of imagery that's used in that prophecy. There's a lot of things that, where John, from his perspective 2,000 years ago, was trying to explain some things to really he could not fathom, he could not understand, because the Lord was showing him the future, and he was seeing these events come to pass, and he was trying to describe these events to the people of that day, saying, this is what I saw in the visions. And so he saw these things, and he saw fire and brimstone, and he saw, their heads as it were lions, and they had power in their mouth and in their tails, and all of this imagery was used. And he saw an army, which he described as 200,000, at least the language of the day described it as that, which, if you figure that out, 200,000 is 200 million man army. And what is interesting about this prophecy is it gives a location to where it's going to start. If you read the prophecy, it says that there were 4 angels that were bound at the river Euphrates, and they were commanded to loose those 4 angels out from the river Euphrates. Well, this is under what is referred to as the 6th trumpet. And for all purposes from this point forward, we will refer to this as the 6th trumpet war. And so there's an alarming truth that we must face as we're talking about the 6th trumpet war. Because the prophecy states that as a result of this war, will 1/3 of mankind be killed. That's right, you heard what I said. 1/3 part of men, 1/3 of mankind. Some versions of the Bible, this is out of the King James Version, some versions of the Bible say 1/3 of all the humans on the earth, 1/3 part of mankind, 1/3 part of men. And so when you look at that and you realize that by today's number, there's nearly 7 billion people on the planet, and by today's number, 1/3 of them is approximately 2.3 billion people that will have been killed as a result of this war. And that should cause an alarm in you, because it's really hard to fathom that many people dying as a result of a war. If you look at World War I, that was the first time that in any war where at least 1 million casualties has been killed. No amount of casualties up to that war. There have not been 1 million casualties until World War I. And the reality was 8 million people died in World War I. And then you advance to World War II, 52 million died. Beloved, we are talking about 2.3 billion by today's numbers dying as a result of this war. And so that has an impact, that has an alarming effect. And as this is under the 6th trumpet, we have to understand if there's 7 trumpets. If you read out of Revelation 9, 10, 11, there's 7 trumpets that take place, and this is the 6th one. And if you look at Bible prophecy and you look at some of the events that have surrounded the world, especially in the 20th century and leading into the 21st century, trumpets 1 through 5 have sounded. Now, I don't have time to explain tonight how we know that, but we can know that, and in a future episode, perhaps in a very near future episode, we will begin to go through the trumpets. It'll probably take a couple of episodes to do that and start lining up why we can know that trumpets 1 through 5 have already sounded. This is the 6th trumpet. Church, there are 7 trumpets in total. We know at the last trump, that will be the trump that brings upon the return of the Lord and the setting up of His kingdom. But for now, we're talking about the 6th trumpet, and so we have to see what is going on here. We have to understand some of the symbology that's used and what the Apostle John was talking about when he wrote this. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining what this is. So it speaks of a war. There's an army, a 200 million man army that is talked about in here. There are 4 angels that are loosed from the river Euphrates. So those are 2 clues that give us to what this event really is. And so the angels were loosed, and John saw the army, 200,000, a 200 million man army. And we can know that because it's an army, this involves a war. And because of that war, it's going to result in 1/3 of mankind being killed. Now, by now, you should be seeing a map on your screen. And on this map, it shows a view of the Middle East. It's a map of the Middle East. You'll see some countries in there. You'll see Turkey. You'll see Syria. You'll see Iraq. Next to Iraq is Iran, although I know on this map it's not showing up as Iran, but the city of Tehran should be showing up on this map. That's the capital of Iran. Of course, you see Israel, and you see some of the other surrounding countries that are involved in the Middle East. And that's important to this prophecy, because on that map, you should be seeing the river Euphrates highlighted, because the 4 angels were loosed from the river Euphrates. So right now, they're bound. And they're prepared, as the prophecy says, for a month, a day, an hour, and a year. So all of those things, they're prepared for a specific time to where these angels are going to be loosed, and this war is going to be the result of the loosing of these angels. And so what's highlighted in green there is the tracing of the river Euphrates. And as you can see, it starts in the land of Turkey. It flows through Syria. Then it flows into Iraq, and much of it is in Iraq. And as you can see, as it culminates, it'll wash into the Red Sea, but before it does, it borders Iran. There's 4 countries there: Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And isn't it interesting that there are 4 angels that are bound at the river Euphrates and are loose? But as you can understand what's going on in the news today, and as you read what's going on to the news today, perhaps you've heard of some of these headlines. Perhaps you've been paying attention to what's going on in the Middle East. It does not only involve Israel and Palestine, but there is a bigger picture of what's going on in there. And you can even go back to 2010 and 2011, and 2012, where it came into the Arab Spring and kind of pushed a point where there have been many protests starting in Egypt, and then we know about the protests in Libya. We know what's going on now in Syria, and we have read recent headlines, which I'm going to read some to you tonight, concerning Turkey and how there is protests going on there. All as a result of this Arab Spring and this push for protests to happen in these Muslim countries, to which we know the leaders have tried to squash. Right now, that's what's going on in Syria, and we know that both in Egypt and in Libya, those leaders have been removed from power as a result of these protests that have taken place. Assad, who is the prime minister of Syria, he's pushing back. There is a revolution going on now. We have yet to see how that's going to play out, but Syria is something we pay attention to, because there are prophecies that speak to Syria, which we will get into a little bit later in the show. But Syria is where the Euphrates flows through from Turkey. It starts in Turkey, it flows into Syria, it flows into Iraq, and then it flows into Iran. And so the names of these countries should sound very familiar to you. And so let's take a look at some of these articles now, and we'll start with what's going on in Syria. This is right off of CNN. This came out June 1st, just a few days ago as of the date of this taping. And it says, open-ended Syrian conflict draws in region. So it's an open-ended conflict. There's not a real resolution that's taking place here. And so I want to read to you a couple of highlights out of that article. First, it starts off by saying rocket attacks in Lebanon, car bombs in Turkey, and Israeli airstrikes in Syria. So right off the bat, this article talks about some of this conflict that's going on in the Middle East. Wars that are going on in some of these countries that are bordering the great river Euphrates. Perhaps those angels have been loosed already. And so time will tell how this plays out. In the 2+ years since President Bashar al-Assad's crackdown on Arab Spring demonstration, observers say the civil war that grew out of it has now become a multi-sided conflict that threatens to set the wider Middle East ablaze. He also says that the Syrian conflict is no longer an internal struggle between Assad and the internal opposition. Middle East Center of London School of Economics says this: it's an open-ended war by proxy. Iran, Hezbollah and Syria, Turkey, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, plus Russia and the United States. You can see that this war, what's going on, this conflict that is happening in Syria, they are not looking to stay confined in Syria. And what happened in the Arab Spring, these demonstrations that have been taking place throughout the Middle East, is starting to paint a picture of a conflict that's going to excel. And you see where the newspaper articles and the news is reporting that they expect this to excel. It looks to where the words of this article say to set the Middle East ablaze. Now, I don't have to tell you, if you've been studying Bible prophecy, that is alarming because it lines up with what is going on with this sixth trumpet war. And as I told you before, we're looking at all of these events that are taking place, and we're talking about what we call convergence, where you have an event here, an event here, an event here, an event here, and all of these are running the same course, and eventually they'll culminate in one place. That's what we see going on. And when people ask you, I don't understand what all of this chaos is about in the world, what's going on in the world, you who have been studying the Bible and who are starting to put the pieces together concerning Bible prophecy can now say, well, this is what's going on, and this is what's happening, and this is where we're going. And so that's what I mean to tell you tonight, that this serves as a warning that we are looking at this particular event, the sixth trumpet war, lining up. And as far as the trumpets go, this is the next event that we're looking at on the world stage. And so let me read a little bit more out of this article. It says, fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq, okay, another country that is on the great river Euphrates. The Al-Qaeda affiliate that has bedeviled Baghdad for years said it has killed at least 40 Syrians in an ambush on a Syrian convoy in Iraq. The troops were being escorted by Iraqi forces to the only border post the Syrian government has control. So far out of this article, we've talked about Israel, obviously, who's the center of the stage right now. But we've talked about Syria. We've talked about Iraq. We've talked about Turkey. And we're going to be getting into Iran because that is certainly a conflict that is rising up. Another article says Iran threatens to attack U.S. bases in event of war. A hotbed that is going on in that region. A senior commander in Iran's powerful Revolutionary Guard warned that Iran will target U.S. bases in the region in the event of war with Israel, raising the prospect of a broader conflict that would force other countries to get involved. Now, do you understand what I'm telling you here? That this Mideast conflict, they're not expecting to say consolidated to the Middle East. They are projecting that these conflicts will involve more countries, that it will expand beyond the borders of the Middle East. That at some point, and even what this prophecy states, will line up with involving the entire world. We are looking at the possibility of World War III. I've already mentioned to you World War I and World War II. What we're looking at this sixth trumpet war is culminating into World War III, to where 1/3 of mankind is getting ready to meet their maker. They're getting ready to be snuffed out into eternity. And so that we have to draw attention to that, especially when we see that this is starting to stir up. This is starting to shape up now. That these countries along the great river Euphrates, the Bible prophesies that it will come out of that region of the world, out of the great river Euphrates, and these countries that the Euphrates flows through, or borders, are what is the center stage of the Middle East right now, and of the conflict that is going on. So Iran here threatens to attack U.S. bases in the event of the war. And you know, when that happens, it's not going to stay confined to there. It's going to involve a world war, because you can see the sides shaping up. We've already mentioned Russia. Well, there's an alliance that will happen with Russia and Iran and China and possibly North Korea and all of these countries. There's an alliance that's shaping up there. And then, of course, you can see the alliance of the United States, who hopefully, and my prayer is, will continue in its support of Israel. Because we know that Israel has many enemies in the region, and Iran is one of those countries that, by its own admission, seeks to wipe Israel off the map. Israel targeted Iranian missiles in Syria attack. So here you have Israel, who's targeting Iranian missiles that the Syrians are using in a potential attack. And what's happening here is Iran is selling missiles to Syria, and you can see that part of the alliance. So those are two countries that are on the border of the Euphrates River, or that which the Euphrates flows through. And so we can see article after article after article. And finally, and these are just a few articles that I have seen regarding this, as Syrians fight sectarian strife infects the Mideast. And this is concerning Iraq. Renewed sectarian killing has brought the highest death toll in Iraq in 5 years. Young Iraqi scholars at a Shiite Muslim seminary volunteer to fight Sunnis in Syria. And so you can see that this civil war is really evolving into something that is beyond the borders of the Middle East and those countries where this conflict is going on. And so these are but a few of the articles that we have seen regarding this. I spent probably about an hour to an hour and a half researching these articles and finding that, and they came very easily. So I would encourage you to do more research to understand what is going on in the Middle East and comparing it to what the Bible told us 2,000 years ago. So as these conflicts and these crises arise, there tends to be a move toward world government. Now, I mentioned World War I, World War II, and I've already told you that in World War I, 8 million died. And the League of Nations was born out of World War I. That was a step toward world government. World War II, after 52 million died, the United Nations was born. The League of Nations, in its structure, didn't work, so they developed it into the United Nations, and of course we know the NATO alliance and all of that came out of there. And that was a result of 52 million. Can you imagine when we wake up at the end of World War III and they tally all the casualties and they say, over 2.3 billion have died as a result of this war. Can you imagine the step toward world government that would take place as people are more willing to surrender civil liberties and to try to bring about peace in the Middle East? Can you imagine what will go on there? Can you imagine the civil liberties that will be given up in order to try to force an era of peace to lead to some of the other events that we've been talking about: the confirmation of the covenant, the abomination of desolation, the great tribulation, and ultimately ending up with the return of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is a day that I definitely look to. But we can see from these articles, and we can see from the prophecy out of Revelation chapter 9, the sixth trumpet, that these conflicts will mostly involve the entire world. It's not going to stay confined. There will be a spillover effect, and of course the United States is going to be a part of that. The United States is still a powerful nation, and we have to understand that in order for things and prophecy to happen, that the United States will ultimately lose its power, its world power status on the world stage. The power has to shift toward Europe and be directed in the Middle East. But you can see how that could happen as a result of this war. Now, on the other side, as we have talked about, there's the alliance with Syria, Iraq, probably Russia, probably China, and we can see those alliances even from these articles. But let's turn our attention to Syria, because I told you before, and that's where most of the conflict is going on right now. That's where a lot of the news is coming out of Syria itself. Well, Isaiah told us in Isaiah chapter 17 and verse 1, it says this: the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Will it be the result of that war? I think it probably will. And since Syria is really, this conflict is really starting to escalate by some numbers. I believe it's somewhere around 80,000 people in Syria has been killed as a result of this conflict. It looks to escalate, and it's escalating into Israel now as there have been attacks on Israel and the conflict regarding the Golan Heights. And of course, that's going to start to involve the whole world. And so when you hear this prophecy out of Isaiah chapter 17 talking about Damascus will be destroyed. It will be a ruinous heap. And so that really should start causing us to think, we are here. We're looking at that time now. And so this is an end-time prophecy. And as you can see, it doesn't look good for Damascus. And that's the capital city of Syria. And so when you hear of the protests and the civil war that's going on now, and the world involvement with that conflict, we're looking at the time where this prophecy is to be fulfilled. Now, we have to understand, it's not maybe this sixth trumpet war will happen. It will happen. It's going to happen. This is Bible prophecy. And every prophecy in the Bible will come to pass. But what we have to understand is how it's coming to pass. And we have to look at that it is coming to pass. Now, many believe that the sixth trumpet war and the Battle of Armageddon are the same thing. They are not the same thing. The sixth trumpet war happens before the start of the final 7 years. The Battle of Armageddon happens after the final 7 years, during the time of the pouring out of the vials, during the time of the wrath of God, where he pours out his wrath on the world. We can see that out of Revelation chapter 16, starting at verse 16. And it says, "And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air. And there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. And there were voices and thunders and lightnings. And there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the city of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, and the plague thereof was exceeding great." And so we know that this is the timing of the vials. And this was the pouring of the seventh vial, and that's at the very end. And so that's when he gathers them into the place of the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And that's where the battle of Armageddon is to take place. And he gathers those nations together to battle. So we have to understand that the sixth trumpet war happens before this. It happens before the seventh trumpet. And if you read out of 1 Corinthians 15, 51 through 52, the seventh trump is when the rapture of the church takes place. It says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed." And if you read the seventh trumpet out of Revelations, that's where the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. It's when the Lord returns and he brings his kingdom back. He raptures his church out. We go to meet with him in the air, and then we come back with him to the Battle of Armageddon to enact judgment on the Antichrist and his armies. And so the Battle of Armageddon and the sixth trumpet war are not the same thing. The sixth trumpet war happens first, and then the final 7 years, and then the Battle of Armageddon. And it looks like that's all I have time for tonight. We will dig into these prophecies more in future episodes and try to bring further light to them. I thank you for joining me tonight, and God bless you, and have a good week. Thank you.